This episode is brought to you by WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. At WeatherGuard, we make lightning protection easy. If your wind turbines are due for maintenance or repairs, install our Strike Tape Retrofit LPS upgrade at the same time. A Strike Tape installation is the quick, easy solution that provides a dramatic, long-lasting boost to the factory lightning protection system. Forward-thinking wind site owners install Strike Tape today to increase uptime tomorrow. Learn more in the show notes of today's podcast. Welcome back. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And I'm Rosemary Barnes.
And this is the UPTIME podcast, bringing you the latest in wind energy tech, news, and policy. Welcome back to the UPTIME Wind Energy Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's show, number one, we've got a great friend of UPTIME, Glen Ryan, who's the co-founder of Sunovate, is going to be joining us to talk about his new startup, which is a fascinating new idea and use for PV, solar panels, which not just turning solar energy into electricity, but also to potentially heat commercial and home spaces, among other things. So really interesting. So we'll look for his conversation in about 20 minutes. First, we're going to talk today about Tesla, some interesting new battery technology that they're waiting for Chinese patents to run out. And then they're going to be, it looks like, going after that technology hard to bring to their cars. And we'll see what Alan and Rosemary think about the trickle-down effect of that technology here in the U.S. and other places. We'll talk about a really crazy video of and you've probably seen it if you're present in the wind industry, of a hub with blades attached falling into the ocean off of the the MPI Adventure jackup vessel. So we'll talk about the implications there. And then after our interview with Glen Ryan, we'll talk about the Virginia's new offshore wind facility that Siemens Gamesa is building here in the U.S. and some of the implications there. And then lastly, we'll chat about Google's 24/7 initiative, which Rosemary is quite excited about, as this puts us further on the path towards a carbon-free future. So before we get going, I just want to remind you, sign up for UPTIME Tech News, which is our weekly newsletter, get updates on this podcast and other news around the web. You can sign up for that in the show notes or description below. And definitely sign up for Rosemary's YouTube channel, which you'll also find in the description below. She's pumping out great new content each week, so definitely follow up if you want to stay up to date on all of her endeavors. So first, let's talk about Tesla. So, obviously they're really pushing hard. They've had a great quarter recently, and their goal now is to push into lithium ion phosphate batteries. So Alan, I'll just toss this right up to you, since you're a big follower of Tesla and all of Musk's endeavors. What does this push towards LFP batteries mean for Tesla? And then, as they sort of lead industries, the rest of the renewables.
Yeah, switching to iron basically will help lower the cost of batteries, clearly. And then also iron is readily available in essentially all countries. So it opens up opportunities in terms of battery construction and will help lower the cost of the batteries. The issue is just sort of how fast you can discharge them. So what Tesla is saying is they're going to apply them to the sort of base model cars that are not like the Plaid, which is 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds kind of thing, where they need a lot of energy very quickly. The iron technology batteries are more sort of long duration, controlled amplitude on how much current it will draw at any one time. So it's a less performance battery, less expensive battery, which is where Tesla needs to get, because all the Teslas are relatively expensive compared to the internal combustion engine cars. And in the United States, I think why this is really important now is, if you noticed, Hertz, which is one of the larger car rental companies in the United States, if not the world, is going to pick up 100,000 Model 3s. That's a large. It's a lot of cars. I'm sure it's the largest fleet order, and until the last year or two, you couldn't even rent an electric vehicle. You could rent hybrids, but that was rare. But to rent a Tesla was off the charts, not going to happen, and they just turned the page on it. So they have to drive the cost of the cars down. Batteries is a big expense. This is the direction they're going to go. I also wonder too, Dan, if and Rosemary, if the China factory plays into this, that Tesla's factory in China, that they're going to go to that technology anyway because that's more of a standard in China, that they want to just uniformly make that the base car because that technology is already in play in different countries and it's recyclable, a little more recyclable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we talked last week about, rare earth minerals and the scarcity there. And of course, nickel, manganese, cobalt, they're not, I don't know if those don't qualify as rare earth minerals, I don't think, but they're definitely scarce and hard to find. And like you said, more regional and not as readily available. I don't know, Rosemary, I mean, does this seem like is this going to trickle down into maybe like home batteries or, I know Tesla's a leader, obviously, in innovation in the battery and electricity sector, if that's a sector, but do you see this spilling over into other avenues, not just cars?
Yeah, I think that it might already be in a lot of stationary batteries because the LFP chemistry has not got the problem with fire that some of the other lithium-ion chemistries have. I mean, I'm no expert, but my understanding is the Powerwalls already use it. I could be wrong about that, but I think that it's at least common in home batteries, if not the only one that's being used. Because the main drawback with the chemistry is it just doesn't have the power density. And also, like the discharge rate, maybe it's harder to get a high discharge rate. So I'm not sure that we're ever going to see it for really high performance cars because, you need that lightweight. You need a lot of power at once, and fast recharging is also good. So maybe it will never go there. But I think that getting cheaper models of electric cars that aren't as high performance is going to be really important. And I mean, for me personally, I'm so desperate to buy an electric car, but I have just been through the exercise and made a spreadsheet and got on, like all the comparison websites. My first obstacle is that, I go on these comparison websites and just find a list of awesome EVs that aren't available in Australia because we have very few available here for a bunch of reasons that I won't go into because they're largely political. And then the second thing is that the upfront price is still more expensive. And for me personally, I mean, I've never bought a new car, or I think the newest car I've ever bought is about 7 years old. So I think consumers like me, I really want one, but it's just the car that's right for me doesn't exist in electric in Australia yet. So I think that, more effort spent on getting that just cheaper entry point. I'm not that worried about acceleration, to be honest. I like going fast, but when I'm driving, I just want to get there safely and with minimal environmental impact. So I think that, when we can get the price point down on, just like boring electric vehicles, that'll be good. And I think this is a step towards that.
I mean, Alan, so do you think, Rosemary mentioned like power walls at home, but that's not a huge market in the U.S.
No.
I mean, do you see any other applications for this battery chemistry over here?
The whole iron battery technology is what Form Energy is talking about, and they're based in Massachusetts, right? And that's a slightly different sort of chemical reaction to create a battery, but everybody wants to get to the cheapest element. That's your dream, right? That's why lead-acid batteries are so common in automobiles, because lead is everywhere and it's inexpensive and it's heavy, but in a car in a standard car, it doesn't really make that much difference. And that's the driver for all batteries, right? The materials are what drive the cost and also the performance. So it's a real trade-off. If you're not moving, then the weight doesn't matter so much, which is why Form Energy is looking at iron technology. It just really has to do a lot with the application. And as the second piece of this, which I think is fascinating, is as we play around with the technology, all battery technology, the iron technology hasn't been fleshed out all the way yet, like we have done with lead acids or with nickel cadmium batteries. That's pretty much flat out pulled all the energy you're going to pull out of it. Technology. Iron batteries, not so much yet. I think there's still a little bit of technology yet to go there. So I think they're going to make them better over the next 4 or 5 years. You should see improvements still.
Okay, so keep holding out, people. Keep holding out. Do what you need to do, but wait for that perfect Model X or Y or whatever when it's got the best chemistry in 5 years. So moving on, like we said, this jackup vessel, the MPI Adventure, dropped one of the hubs, with the hub, the three blades, pitch motors, batteries, electrical cabinets, grease pumps, and other components all are now resting happily at the bottom of the ocean. Rosemary, having watched this video, what do you think happened? I heard like a pop and a ping. So it looks like some piece of rigging maybe gave way.
Yeah, it looked like something like that. I mean, the video I saw, you can hear. I guess it's one of the guys involved in driving the crane. It didn't seem like human error where someone, just like whacked it into the ship. It did sound like something broke and it just fell. And I don't know. I don't work on a lot of construction projects, whether it's wind or any other aspect of construction. I guess this sort of thing happens every now and then. Something fails and gets dropped. But it was cool that they were filming it. That's the most
I know, right?
exciting aspect.
It's my
of this.
dream. It's my dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. And luckily, no one was hurt, and luckily it wasn't over the ship, because Alan and I were discussing like how much weight could a ship deck hold, right? Like, could you drop a 2,000-pound weight just onto the ship deck and it not go all the way through and sink the ship? Like, we don't know how obviously these are formidable vessels, but I mean, only about half that blade hit the edge of the boat, and the rest of it just went right into the ocean.
Yeah, even if they could carry, the hundreds of tons of weight, to have it dropped on there, that's probably not a design load that anybody is designing a ship to handle, I would guess.
Alan, I mean, does it look like a rigging error? Or just a failure? I mean, all these things are made, like super high strength webbing, right? Like that crazy nylon webbing that can hold ungodly amounts of weight. But it's still supported by steel rings and hooks and carabiners and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Could one of them just had a manufacturing flaw, a little something wrong with the metal, and finally gave way?
Well, my first reaction was maybe the winds were high, and that obviously increases the load that the crane is lifting, and that's usually what will cause a crane to collapse or something to break, because it's over its rated value. In this particular case, it can't be, because they were making a lift with this system, so it must have been qualified usually 2 or 3 times the rated load. That doesn't make any sense either. It's just weird that you hear something. It sounds like something snapped, right? And like ping, and then down it comes. The follow-on for this is going to be really interesting, just because they're going to have a safety stand down. People could have been really hurt or killed in that situation, and you could have really critically damaged the ship at the same time. So it's not only a people loss; it's like millions and millions and millions of dollars in damage. So usually when those safety kind of events happen, it's a complete stand down. Everybody stops what they're doing. They try to regroup and figure out what happened, and that can take months at times. So I'm really thinking this is going to be a real big setback. And I know we're getting close to the end of the wind turbine installing season up in the northern hemisphere. It's pretty close right now. So I'm not expecting them to be there much longer, and maybe that was part of the deal. They're trying to rush to get some things done. It can't, and especially when we're talking about the United States, when those kind of videos show up, it just automatically hits all the safety regulators in the United States, and they'll start putting rules in place about how that can't happen here and how you're going to avoid it. And just the consequences are so massive that you just don't want people to get hurt, and rightly so. So there's a lot. It's just like the truck we saw, the train right through the wind turbine blade down in Texas. I haven't heard anything more about that, and I haven't seen anything in the press. But I assume that there's been some safety stand-downs there too, that we're trying to make things better. So it's just not a good situation right now.
Yeah, and so this wind farm was owned by Vattenfall. And they had contracted Van Ord, which owns MPI Offshore, who was, that's their jackup vessel. So, yeah, these things, it's hard to know how many of these things happen in just daily life, because like so much construction is going on all over the world, right? I mean, cranes tip over. It happens. Like, these things happen all over. Obviously, once in a while they catch it on video, and it gets more scrutiny than it otherwise would. And fortunately, there were no deaths, like you said. And unfortunately, this is going to fall right into the hands of, like all the right wing in America that wants to point out how evil wind power is, right? So expect lots of that in the future as well. But obviously, like you said, rightly so, the regulators. So, yeah, but I imagine that this won't be a long investigation because there weren't that many things involved. It was rigged up either properly or improperly, right? And if it was rigged properly, then which failed, right? You're going to see a broken piece of webbing or, a bolt or some piece of connection or, some piece of rigging gave way. So I'm sure it won't take too long to figure out what the root cause was.
Yeah, but the root cause isn't so simple as just seeing what part broke. It's you got to figure out how it's possible that part broke. So, was it inspected correctly? And I don't know. You can't guess at what the root cause was, but it's never simple to find a root cause, even if you know exactly what broke. The root cause analysis is going to be lengthy on something that's so regulated as that as well. It's not like their root cause is going to be, oh, hey, we bought the wrong webbing and and it just wasn't rated high enough. That's not going to be it on an organization that experienced and, where the stakes are as high as it was for this installation. There's, it probably will be quite complex, even if at the end of the day, it's like, oh yeah, the webbing broke. It won't be a simple matter to figure out exactly why it broke and how to make sure that it can never, ever happen again.
Well, and of course, right now, obviously, they're trying to salvage as well. So a lot of the big components are at the bottom of the ocean, but then there's a lot of debris fragments that are going to end up, making it to the shore, they said. A lot of glass fiber and just chunks of wood and other debris. And what was interesting was that they're urging people to, don't touch anything. Like I said, if you see debris, don't pick it up, don't put it in the trash, don't touch it, which seems just like an obvious, they're just trying to stay out of litigation at this point. Because I'm sure someone would love to, oh, there's a thing in the beach, I'm going to grab it and claim that it cut my hand open and file a lawsuit and get a nice settlement out of it. So I'm sure they're just trying to be as cautious as they can while cleaning it up as quickly as they can.
To be honest, I would pick that up if I saw it on the beach and take it home as a souvenir. I mean, definitely. sorry
to
the
put it on
company
top
involved.
of a table, put on a table and pour some epoxy on top of it, make one of those cool bar tops.
Right. Yeah, I'd be careful not to get splinters from
debris.
the fiberglass, but I think I would like that souvenir. So yeah, good luck to them to try and stop people from touching it.
All right, so we're going to transition now to our interview with Glen Ryan, who is the co-founder of Sunovate. He is also the inventor and co-founder of Bombora Wave Power. So really all-encompassing conversation about just his entrepreneurial endeavors and a lot of stuff that he's learned over the years. And this dovetails really well with a lot of our conversation with Rosemary and Alan as far as, good engineering ideas and good technology don't always make it to market. And that was one of the things we wanted to pick Glen's brain about today, just because he's been in the industry so long, been a founder of multiple startups, and just how difficult it is, even with good technology, with a good premise, and even a budding market, it can still be really difficult to get people to buy in and get regulators and policy in place where you can make things happen. So without further ado, we're going to shift to our conversation with Glen Ryan, co-founder of Sunovate. Yeah, so let's get right into it. So Sunovate obviously is your solar startup, but it's bigger than that. So one of the big things that seems like the common way we think about solar panels are they just provide electricity, right? They capture the sunlight, convert electricity, goes through, powers your home or back to the grid, whatever. But you're using your startup Sunovate is going beyond that and saying, hey, we could not just collect electrical energy from the solar panels, but also use some of the extra thermal heat that's created to actually thermally heat and cool the home. I mean, that seems like a crazy, why don't we think of this kind of idea? But why hasn't that come to market yet? And how can you pull that off where you're sending both electricity and heat and cooling into a home?
So great question, Dan. We originally installed our 3 kilowatt PV system nearly 10 years ago. And I guess we were initially confronted by the fact that in the middle of summer, when we were expecting it to produce the full 3 kilowatts, it was only producing 1.9 kilowatts. So we set about a way of, I guess, trying to recover some of that electricity during the heat, during the summer, because heat is the panel's enemy. The hotter the panel gets, the less the electricity it produces. So we developed a system that sat underneath the panel, and we cooled the panel with the air that was blowing through it. We regained that electrical production, but we also realised that we had a great deal of awesome heat coming off the top of it. So we actually pivoted the business to actually focus on more the thermal side. So we set up the system, and we demonstrated that on a number of different panels, and then we went and produced a domestic system. So now we channel the air from inside the house up through the panels, and we collect the heat, and then we draw that air back through the traditional air conditioning ducting system, and we deposit that back through the house. So it's very simple and very effective.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on like the Model T, when cars were first in development, but I assume there was the same aha sort of moment with the first car, right? Like they're water cooling it, and at some point they realize, hey, it's really cold when we drive this in the winter. Maybe we can use the water cooling and pull something through the car. That's probably literally that same idea. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing. And I've heard you can lift the internal temperature of a house 15 to 20 degrees above ambient. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. So that was that was our aha moment. It's like, well, why don't we do something with this heat? So we basically have the system goes in open loop or closed loop. So in wintertime, when we want to retain the heat inside the house, we draw the air from inside, we push it through the panels, and typically we're getting a 15 to 20 degree uplift off the panels, which turns it into a nice balmy summer day as it comes back inside the house.
So, Glenn, the obvious choice to cool solar panels typically is to put some sort of liquid, antifreeze, water, you name it, underneath the panel to cool it. Why air instead of a liquid?
So a really good question. And look, there are, I guess this technology classification is called PVT, so photovoltaic thermal. So there are a range of other technologies out there that do use both liquid glycols and refrigerative cooling mechanisms. I guess our original proposition was to boost the electrical output. So we were focused on cooling the cells equally because we wanted to basically get that maximum electrical gain out of it. And maybe if I explain, if you have a hot cell within a string of your PV panel, that's essentially, the foot on the pipe of the current. So if you don't cool them all to that, that equal temperature, the hot cell dictates what basically drives the current. So ours is unique in that we cool every cell basically evenly. So the difference between a water system is, or a refrigerative system, is they typically have one inlet at one corner of the panel and an outlet at the top end of the panel. So you have a thermal gradient from one end of the panel to the other, and that is challenging in terms of cell manufacturers. So they don't like thermal stresses or other stresses being imposed on their panels. So that's one of the reasons we went around it. So that was, I guess that was quite a interesting diversion from existing technology.
But, liquid will cool a lot faster. What is it, about 4 times faster than heat? It'll transfer heat, or 4 times faster than air. But it just sounds like that add a lot of complexity, right? And of course, you're trying to bring this to market at a big scale. Did that just pose further problems?
Because air is quite unique in the marketplace, so within the PVT classification, we are sort of forging one of those earlier marketplaces. You're correct that the energy carrying potential of water is 4 times higher than air per mass. But I guess water presents, and liquids present a challenge, the thermal stresses that we spoke of, but also extra weight, extra fittings to be connected. So, if we over time lose a little bit of air, it's not critical. But if you lose a little bit of refrigerant or liquid, or, especially when you're dealing with water, it becomes a little bit more critical. So, a solar panel may look nice solar thermal system might look nice in the first 10 years, but I can tell you from personal experience, they look pretty cruddy after the second 10 leaks and the like. So just not a good place for electricity as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned at the start that you saw a decrease in the efficiency of your just normal solar panels. What was it, from 3 to less than 2 kilowatts? So a huge decrease. What can you bring it back up to by getting rid of some of that excess heat?
Okay, so it's essentially how much air we push through the system. So we've got a comparative test bay next to our domestic demonstrator. So we have 5-panel PVT system, and then we have 4 other panels that are adjacent to it in the same plane. And in that, we test what's essentially a PVT system, built-in PV with no airflow, right through just to a standard tin roof mounted system. And we compare the cell temperatures across those. So what we've been able to show over summer is that, the built-in PV can get nearly as high as 100 degrees Celsius, so, close to boiling. And even the basic ones that are sitting on a tin roof, they're way up into the high 80s. So what we've been able to demonstrate through our system is that we've actually brought those cell temperatures in our PVT system down to low 50s in one of our experiments. So we essentially just flood the system with air, and we can pull that performance right back. We do have a need to drive fans, so there is an additional parasitic loss, but that's less than the gain that we get from the electricity. And a part of our innovation is actually how do we get that relationship between extra power required for the fan versus the extra power we get for electricity. So that's part of the innovation that we've developed as well.
And then in addition to like the heat, obviously, it's producing heat, you're, sweeping that heat away with air. Makes sense that you can then use that waste air to heat a home. But can you explain that? It sounds like you can cool a house as well, which just sounds incredibly counterintuitive. I mean, how does that end up happening when you've got solar rays heating up a panel, and yet you can take cool air and cool a home with it?
So it was, one of our Model T moments there, Dan, is, we used to have our little experiment sitting out there, and we'd go out and do our tests each day. And then one morning I went out there a little bit earlier than I normally would, and all this condensation was streaming off our PVT panel, but it wasn't streaming off the third panel that was kind of like an open back panel. So I went, oh, that's interesting. And I guess, we started through observation realizing that overnight, we read a bit more about night radiative cooling, and, you kind of wonder why your car has all this dew on it in the morning, or windows freeze over and it's not freezing. Well, there's a whole ancient art around, ice making and all this sort of stuff that the ancient cultures used to use. So they use this phenomenon called night radiative cooling, and PV panels are actually well suited to that because they're black. They radiate heat to space. So we've measured our cell temperatures to be up to minus 8 degrees Celsius below ambient. So if you've got a really clear, one of those crystal clear skies, when you walk out at night at times and you feel your kind of, the heat just sinking out of your head, that's kind of night radiative effect. So, really interesting phenomena. So we just took that to our advantage. So the cooling aspect of our panel happens at nighttime. So, during the daytime, we can capture the heat for, or below the summer. It depends. You probably don't have a huge heating load, so you might want to heat your hot water and your pool, but you don't want to heat your house. So any excess energy we will dump, to atmosphere. But at nighttime, we just leave the system running at a slightly lower rate, and we bring the cold ambient air in, and we push it through the panels. It gets subcooled, and then we distribute that cold air back through the house. So you get fresh air, and you get it cooled. So essentially, like we have done over the last year or so, is we essentially don't need any external heating and cooling because we run with the passive nature of the system.
And then you mentioned heating water. You can also heat water with this. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, it's like a drafting gate of what you want to do with heat. So we can go straight to space heating without any extra heat exchangers, just a fan. But then we can also push that hot air over a coil. So that coil might have water in it, which we can heat up. So just like a radiator in your car, coming back to Mr. Ford's Model T. And also we can also use the evaporator of a heat pump. So we just pass that heated air over the top of the coils and we extract the energy that way.
So Glenn, I want to shift gears a little bit. So you are the founder of Bombora Wave Energy. So this is not, your first venture. You've been a serial entrepreneur, and Bombora has been successful, and you're still a founding shareholder there. Can you tell us, one of the things we're going to get into today is, with all these great ideas, not all of them make it to market. Like, it's not that simple where you just have a good idea. Rosemary gets this all the time on our YouTube channel. People send her, engineering drawings of, hey, I've got a new wind turbine. And it might work on paper, but is this actually viable in the market? Is it going to be able to take off? Is it going to be mass produced? Like, who's it going to fit in the market? Are people going to adopt it? So I know you had a lot of growing pains with Bombora, and it's really done well now. But what have you learned from that? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with Bombora and what that's meant to you in this second big venture?
Okay. Look, it's been a fantastic learning experience, and I had a little wind turbine design even before Bombora, which will...
Don't show it to Rosie. She'll tear you to shreds.
Yeah.
It's vertical axis as well.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
oh, no. She'll set fire. She'll set fire to it.
Oh
no! Well, and Rosie, I guess will understand. So I guess even with Bombora and this little wind turbine idea, I guess the first thing we learned about was convergent technology. So whilst I was developing that little wind turbine, the biggest wind turbine available was 330 kilowatts. By the time I'd finished my R&D project, 1 year later, the biggest wind turbine was 1.6 megawatts.
Wow, that's crazy.
I guess I suddenly realised then that. Even if you've got a better widget, sometimes it's timing to market. So I will say that my widget wasn't better than the horizontal axis. It was still good, but they had the best scaling potential. So I kind of took that into Bombora. So what was interesting there is, I guess, I've created solutions for the market that hasn't actually asked for it yet. So what I saw the potential with Bombora, or wave power in general. So I actually started with the idea of wave power. I didn't have a design. And I went, well, this would be good to support wind and solar. So when the solar's weak during summer, and we know the waves are really strong in winter, wave and wind kind of was quite complementary. Wind is seasonal, but probably to a lesser degree. So I used to say that's like the third leg of the renewable energy sort of supply matrix. So that was kind of where we started off there. And I guess once we realised that wave had this potential to solve future energy mixes, then we set about the technology. So, but look, has been really challenging. Like I said, we I guess as an engineer, my learning through Bombora was that you don't engineer the hell out of it. Okay, so we learnt that customer is king. Listen to the customer in this experience with Sunovate, and we've been really cautious about not spending too much more on the technology, but actually focusing on the market and the customer. You only get really one chance to cross that valley of death. Very few companies get the second chance to go. So. That was kind of our learning out of the Bombora experience, is that, and that's a big, deep tech, that's, they've spent, $20+ million on that technology so far.
Well, and that reminds me of kind of like, the Apple story, like Steve Jobs is obviously a legendary, businessman. And, when he brought the iPod and the iPad, like these were product markets that didn't exist. Like there was no market for a tablet. There was no MP3 player at that point, or maybe there were, but his was fundamentally different, right? He was saying, hey, customers, I don't want to give you what you want. And of course, I know that old quote attributed to Henry Ford. I don't know if it's actually attributed to him, but he said, if I'd given what the customers wanted, I would have given them a faster horse, right? I don't know if that's, I've heard mixed reviews of that quote's actually attributed to Henry Ford, but the same thing, keep going back to the Model T, trying to engineer something that people don't know they need yet. Is that kind of what you meant with Bombora Wave, that the market didn't know that it wanted it or needed it, or that it could be a viable technology?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's, I guess, the epiphany. This has kind of come through this year with Microsoft and Google coming out just recently, going, well, we've achieved net zero, but we're not net zero every hour. So some classic Google graphs come up where they're just trying to remember where they are 40% of the time they're still using black energy when they basically look at it temporarily. So, what we're saying is that's where the sort of the fit starts to come with the Bombora technology. Working in the ocean is, it's an horrendous environment, so you have to be survival, and it's not going to come as cheap as sticking a panel on a roof. But when you start to time value that energy, it becomes, that's when it starts to drop in the slot. So as we have experienced here in Western Australia, we've got, as much as some of our federal policy is quite backward, we've got a policy that was developed in 2001, which is called the Renewable Energy Target. And we're still working on that policy framework today. And that's actually allowed us in Western Australia to have during the middle of the day, the biggest power station is rooftop solar. So we have over a gigawatt in a system that is at times getting down to, grid facing, less than a gigawatt itself. So, rooftop is the predominant generator now. So we're now faced with turning wind farms off during the middle of the day, and even some big solar farms, because we're getting negative prices. So the coal's just getting wedged, and it can't. It's got no more demand to soak it up into. So they're using pricing instruments to basically keep the lights on due to coal, and it's shutting down wind and solar. So that's kind of where we're at. So when you look at that next evolution, if we're trying to get rid of that coal system out of the, we need this diversity in renewables. So energy storage will come in and play, but you've got to think of the system as a whole. So I guess that's, now we see where Bombora will fit in the future energy mix, and people will start to pay a price for that. 15 years ago was just a little bit too early for that conversation.
Yeah, Glenn, I think you raised some really good points just in the sort of the venture entrepreneurial spirit of trying to create technology where there's a lot of government oversight. That makes being an engineer and an entrepreneur just adds levels of difficulty to it, because you're trying not to convince maybe a customer, you're trying to convince a government, and governments move slowly and make a lot of wrong decisions.
Yep.
So if you're in that marketplace, I think Sunovate's taking a different approach, which is, hey, we have this sort of existing technology which has been blessed by the government. Let's make it better. And does that clear some of those pathways for you as a business?
Oh, it does, yeah. I mean, more the commercial pathways. So you raised very good points. So with Bombora, we had OEMs. The scale of the business, we needed both policy support, we needed grants to get the early products going through, but ultimately you need a long-term revenue stream. So you need certainty of, if you deploy and get to scale, where are you going to still make money, or where's your investors or your project developers still going to make money? So, here in Australia, we got wind and solar, but we've got it's a fairly linear certificate. They get the same certificate, so there's no discrimination. So Wave in its early days is never going to compete with wind and solar. So you're only, you're pricing yourself against their electricity and their certificate price. It's never going to happen. But in the UK, they have what's called a mechanism which is contract for difference. And then they break that up into portfolios. So, they have an offshore wind market, they have an onshore wind market. So they've got different classifications that you can compete against your peers. And that means you may get one or two certificates in there for your Wave technology. So suddenly you've got a guaranteed revenue stream, and you're not competing. Your revenue is not at risk from other technologies or policy, changes. So that's
right.
That's what. So we all, it actually, we need all those things happening at the same time. Your comment about Sunovate, well, with all those learnings there, I've tried to prune as many of those other externalities that I can sort of control. So we're looking. We still have got challenges. So in Australia, we don't have a renewable heat target. The British have just come out and announced that they've got basically their roadmap for their domestic housing stock. So I had a lovely read of that yesterday, and I did a couple of word counts, and solar thermal featured 3 times, and hydrogen featured 341 times. So, it's kind of like, so we still have, those challenges of actually, we have the technology here in today. We don't have to go invent, sophisticated hydrogen gas boilers and things like that.
Yeah.
We just got to work out how we integrate those into the system.
That's actually something that I was thinking about the whole time that you're talking. It's interesting that, you've developed in Australia. That makes sense because there's so much rooftop solar in Australia. I know more than, I think like a quarter of houses have rooftop solar. But on the other hand, heat is not something that we talk about too much in Australia. And when we do talk about it, it's mainly because, like a gas distribution company has invested in hydrogen. That's the only thing I ever hear about in Australia, even though we've probably got the least challenging renewable heat problem out of anywhere in the world. So I was just wondering how you see Sunovate competing with hydrogen, with heat pumps. How will it fit in? What places is Sunovate's technology going to suit compared to some of those others?
So I spend a good part of my time, I guess people say I bash hydrogen. I think hydrogen has a very good place in our future energy mix, but it's not heating our homes and cooking our food. It's displacing existing hydrogen requirements, fertilizers, minerals processing. So, I try and say, look, if I had $1, why would I, kind of burn it, and taking all this high entropy product and really just devaluing it. So we say the same with electricity. So, why take a premium product which can give you mobility and drive your appliances and computers like we are today? Why go and destroy that into heat? So I guess we're starting trying to move that conversation. We also are big proponents of heat pumps, but what we say is with our technology, you can have a much smaller heat pump. So we just use the heat pump for the topping cycle, not doing all the cycles. When you get to like a European or a very cold climate where they're all pushing to go heat pumps, we know the first thing that's going to happen. Well, we talk about emerging problems that people don't see is that electrical network is going to get stressed big time because, they're going to put big heat pumps, they're going to have car chargers. You're moving, I guess, the global energy carrier, the electricity carries about a quarter of the world's final energy demand. So you're asking it to basically go to, 3 or 4 times its existing capacity to service all these new customers. So yes, we'll get smarter about how we dispatch those loads. So in terms of timing, we'll have timers and demand responses, but we're still challenged with getting that volume into those services. Those domestic heating and commercial services. So I guess coming back to Rosie's question there, in Australia, surprisingly, when we did our research, the heating demand, especially for Melbourne and Canberra and all that, it's actually higher than some of the high altitude European countries because essentially our houses leak and they're poor performance. So we have massive heating loads.
Yep, I know that that problem very intimately. I just moved from Denmark to Canberra, and I have frozen the whole winter. It's such a contrast.
It's a common thing. Yeah,
yeah.
And then in summer you'll bake, and that's I guess part of the challenge. So we have huge opportunities here in Australia, but without targets or these incentive programs, we're happy to make gas systems more efficient, but we're not actually happy to transition across to renewable heat.
Do you think that part of it is because it doesn't need a huge, it's not some really out there space technology kind of level innovation. It's, like the way that you describe it, it's quite simple. It's, I can imagine how it works after you describe it in a couple of minutes. Do you think that that's part of the problem? I noticed this a lot with all kinds of renewable energy technology reporting, that it's the really out there ideas that capture people's imagination and get them excited. And I wonder if that's part of it with hydrogen, that it's like, wow, it's this huge challenge. We need to design all these new things. How exciting. Do you think that is more appealing for an investor to see some huge technology gap that, this new company is going to provide, do you think it actually handicaps the, more mature, more robust technologies?
Absolutely. So I guess I'll have a little analogy around this. It's the George Jetson versus Fred Flintstone. George Jetson, has the technology and the buzz and the future and all that excitement. Fred Flintstone's, he's still, it's basic technology gets him from A to B, but it's not sexy. And I find, I guess there's two elements. I think part of it is the policy and I guess the camera moment. So you have our policymakers wanting to get in front of highlighting these great hydrogen, and it sounds interesting, sounds complicated, lots of technical stuff, and there is a big push from the natural gas manufacturers to I guess continue their product stream, which is through the blue hydrogen or clean hydrogen as our government likes to call it. But I think there is that really it's that simple. Okay, it gets moved over quite quickly. It's I guess what we've found is, as people walk inside our house over wintertime and they go, oh, that's nice and warm, they connect with the service. So they connect with, a nice warm house, thermal comfort. They don't really care what's up on their roof. So I guess that's why we've taken a bit of more of a change in tact. And, we talk about the customer and what they experience as opposed to kind of the technology. So, as an engineer that's been trained in solving problems and, all this stuff, it takes a little while for you to reconstruct your thought processes. But,
That's fascinating, Glenn. I really like that, to hear that, because rarely do you hear engineers talk about basically building confidence and selling a product. And I think you have a really great product to deliver, right? And it comes down to building that sort of relationship, that confidence that this works. It doesn't have to be complicated to work. And there's engineering involved, clearly, but does the user really care? I mean, the users don't care how their iPad works. They just don't care, right? So it comes back to, is it reliable? Does it do what you say it's going to do? And is a value proposition for me? Exactly. If you can check those boxes, then I think the product will succeed regardless of how, quote unquote, technological the product is. It doesn't matter anymore. And I think that's where you really find a sweet spot, is because everybody can relate to losing power out of a PV panel. And that's just, that's one of those depressing things. It's going to happen. There's nothing you do about it. But you're saying, wait a minute, let's rethink that. Yeah, you don't have to lose that power, one. But two, we can be much more efficient and make your home much more comfortable without a lot of complexity. That's a great product. I think that just makes Sunovate such basically a leader in that market space. And I think that's just really going to push the market. Yeah.
One of the things we work on is just spatial constraints, so and energy independence. So I've talked a lot about the macro and the grid scale stuff, but what's really interesting for us is that just through our very basic system that we've got here, we don't have a domestic battery, but we've got a now little EV. So now we're managing our portfolio of just a simple 3 kilowatt grid system plus our PVT. And, we're freeing up that electricity that may have been used for heating for our car. So suddenly within this constrained portfolio, we're managing our energy budget. So the issues about time of use and stuff like that, like I know in the middle of the day, I just set the car timer from about 10 to 2 and I set the rate of the timer and it's done, and I suck up all that cheap energy that's going off to the grid that they're challenged with. And I got free energy for my car.
And so, Glenn, one of the last major questions I have is, what's your market? So you've been talking about heating the home, but it sounds like you're going to go after more of a commercial market, kind of from like a simplistic, from a standpoint of keeping your product simple and easy to install and easy to scale. So can you talk about like commercial or home, and what are you guys focused on in the future as you really start to launch and get out there?
As probably all of you know, that every technology goes through a learning rate phase. So we are bespokely manufacture, we're expensive, but we've got to scale to market quickly. And I guess we realise that we probably won't have the same, just focus on our technology as wind and solar have in the past in terms of massive R&D. So we've got to work out how we get there fast. So we've actually we enjoy the domestic market, but it's, how would I say, the cost of customer acquisition and the complexity of smaller projects to scale is problematic for us to start with. Although there's an attractive market there for early adopters, but we want to get into the hundreds and thousands of panels really quickly. So we're really looking at what we call the district heating market, or larger platforms. So we can basically scale the technology really quickly, get lots of panels, lots of frames, and get that market traction at scale. And once we've got that adoption, we can then again scale our manufacturing, do all those learnings, and bring our costs down so that we can actually make the product really competitive with gas long term in the domestic sense. So that's our scaling opportunity. We'll start in the hundreds to megawatts sort of projects. And then once we scale, we'll come back to those domestic opportunities.
So, and is that because, if you're going to put this on one house or two houses, different roof shape, different, size, they don't need nearly as much wattage. That probably just becomes more of a complex, takes more time, takes more architecture to get that one system built versus, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's if you throw this on a huge commercial building, it's 1,000 of the same panels, in like a modular, just line them all up, very simple, ship them all out, and just run down there and install them. Is that kind of the difference?
It's exactly it. So we only have to deal with smaller amount of customers, smaller amount of engine. So an engineer can deploy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's basically deploying of the effort. So it doesn't take much more effort to do a commercial system than it does 2 or 3 domestic ones. So that's kind of the tactic we've taken there.
Okay, so you mentioned that one of the early markets that you want to chase is district heating, and where I was living in Denmark, we had district heating from a combined heat and power from, actually it was mostly burned garbage that they send the heat out. But obviously you need the heating in the wintertime, and you're making the heat all year round. So do you know how they deal with that and how that will relate to what you're planning with district heating?
Yeah, well, certainly, and that's why we're focusing on both probably Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, because they actually have lots of district heating systems, but they've also got large seasonal storage solutions. So, one of the things we need for a technology is to make sure if you're producing the energy that you actually get to sell it. So what happens in Denmark is they've got these solar fields that they charge these big pit storage systems, so many swimming pools in size with an insulated cap on the top of it. So over summer they will charge that big thermal battery to meet that wintertime demand. So as they get cloud cover or sustained periods of basically no solar isolation, they can draw upon that big thermal storage system and basically still deliver the service of heat and thermal comfort. So for us, that's a great market because we can take our technology there and we can sell pretty much every kilowatt hour of heat that we produce can go into that market where, say, for example, here in our domestic system over summer, we're long on heat, so we just dissipate that to atmosphere. So, it's kind of, if we had a pool, we could heat that with that, but, we're trying to maximize the thermal production.
Well, Glenn, this was an awesome conversation. We really appreciate it. This was, like I said, it's one of those, why haven't we done this sooner kind of technologies. Already exists, already a great framework for it. People already really trust solar. So I think it's really, really impressive what you're doing. How can people follow up with you and Sunovate?
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you both, Dan, Rosemary, and Alan for the invitation. You can follow me on LinkedIn. That's my social profile. So you'll be able to find me at Glen Ryan at Sunovate, and also our webpage, www.sunovate.com.au.
And as always, we'll link in our description below, no matter what platform you're listening or watching on, so you can connect easily. So just open up the show notes and you can click through to follow up with Glenn and learn more about Sunovate. Glenn, thanks again for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you very much. My pleasure.
So again, we want to thank Glen Ryan for coming on the show. Be sure to follow up with him. You'll find links to Sunovate and to connect with him in the show notes or description of this podcast, wherever you're listening. We appreciate his time. And again, great conversation. A lot of the intricacies of being an entrepreneur in this space. So we're going to shift to Siemens Gamesa is making a new offshore wind farm in Virginia here in the United States. And this is a $200 million facility, and they say will create approximately 260 jobs. So, Alan, you've been following the U.S. policy pretty closely. Yeah. What do you think this means to get a facility here right in the, I don't know if Virginia is still the Northeast or not, but, you know, the East Coast right in the center. It seems like a good place to put one.
It is, because it's right in the middle of all the activity. You can go north and go south, and there will be wind turbines out in the ocean there shortly. The $200 million is a sizable investment for Siemens, and I think the state and local governments are going to be supportive of that also in terms of financing and putting the roads in and putting the power stations in and all the things that are needed to actually create that facility, because there's just a lot of infrastructure that has to happen. But this is going to be the first of many, from what it seems. LM's obviously going to have to be building a facility somewhere, and TPI, which is a big blade manufacturer out of Rhode Island already, they're pretty close to the shoreline right now, so they kind of have their foot in the door in terms of being able to make offshore wind turbine blades. You'll see a lot of activity out of them. Obviously, it's the Vestas is yet to be known. Nordex is still unknown a little bit, and if there's going to be any Chinese players, which there most likely will have to be at some point, you think that they're going to want to try to negotiate something there. We'll see how it plays out, because there's a lot of politics with that. So there's going to be a lot more activity up and down the coastline. For the states, I don't know if it's like this in Australia, but obviously the United States, there's 50 independent states, so they can all sort of vie for that business opportunity. That's what's happening, is that they're trying to drive the jobs into their state and localities, because it's such a huge influx of cash that you're going to make a lot of really beneficial deals for the companies to bring those jobs in. So a lot's going to change in the next year or two up and down the shorelines.
Yeah, this strikes me as a small amount of jobs, though, for a $200 million facility. Maybe I'm just way off, but that's like just a gut reaction. I mean, Rosemary, how many jobs does a facility typically support, a blade facility?
Yeah, I thought the same thing when I read the number. Was it 260 or something? 200,
yeah.
And I thought, that sounds small. And then I thought, how many people are normally in a factory? And I mean, I never counted. I never actually asked that question, but I feel like, at any time there's, at least 100 or more working in the factory. And so if they're covering 3 shifts a day, then you would think it would be like quite a few hundred in like a medium sized wind turbine blade factory. So it sounded small to me, but I don't actually have the figures on hand that could, conclusively say, yes, that's small. Maybe they're starting off with just a single mold, a single production line. I'm not sure. But maybe it will grow if the market grows.
Well, yeah, it has to grow, just because the number of blades that are needed offshore off the United States. If they're going for 30 gigawatts, there's a lot of blades that need to be built. And I think from Virginia and Massachusetts are going through the same thing right now where I'm from. It's all the surrounding jobs that happen. So all the machinists that are making all the tooling, all the carpenters that are setting up building the facility, all the other electricians and all those sort of people who come in to make those things happen, provide a lot of jobs. And then obviously the surrounding restaurants and hotels and all those pieces, the rental cars, we'll see all that business too. So it's not just the facility itself; it's just this is surrounding area that looking in terms of jobs. But Rosemary, if we're growing, the question for me is, we really haven't stopped on the size of wind turbines. Like, we're really ramping up in 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 megawatt machines. If I'm going to build a facility today, is it going to be out of use or because the blades are going to get even longer, or just keep adding on to the building as the blades get longer?
Yeah.
It's a big issue. And when I was at LM, the main reason for the new factories that were opened was because they simply, couldn't fit in the old factories. They would often, it was pretty common over the last few decades to do extensions to the length of the factory to fit, the new blade lengths. And if every time you announce the longest blade, longer than any that you've got before, you have to figure out which factory you're going to make it in, because most of the factories won't be long enough. But then when they get to a certain size, it's not just the length of the factory that's important, it's the height as well, because, these really long blades, if they're, 80 meters plus length, the maximum chord is going to be 5+ meters. So you need to be able to rotate the blade to work on all parts of it. So you need an area that's high enough to do that. They do just get really huge. I don't see people planning very far ahead now in terms of longer and wider blades. Like, I don't see factories being built that are just way huger than they need to be for the blade that they're planning. And I think that's partly because it's not so obvious to say where the size of blades is going to stop. Because, we have seen, obviously, the trend is that blades get longer and longer and longer and longer. And we've all been saying since, the year 2000 or before, however long anyone's been working in the industry, everyone's been like, whoa, blades are getting so long, it can't go on. And I know that, some of the people I've worked with that have been working in the industry for decades are like, when I started, blades were 12 meters long, and we all wondered where it would stop. And we were pretty sure you'd never have a blade that was 20 meters long. Now here we are, well over 100. But the fact is that, as you scale them, you don't get as much extra power as you spend extra in materials to make a blade longer. It's just, the laws of physics, the power scales with the square of the blade length, because the swept area increases with the square, and the materials increase with the cube approximately, unless you make technology advances, which we have. So it's other factors that are causing blades to get longer. It's not about the blade. It's about, having less subsea cables and about having less, connections and less of all of those things and installation. It's all those things. And it's worth noting that at any point in time, we're at the optimal blade size. That's the point. When you put out a new turbine, you figure out what is the absolute cheapest, dollars per megawatt hour that we can get out of this thing. And then that's why they've made it the size that they have. So it's not that a bigger turbine would be more optimal, but it may be in the future. So I think it's really hard to predict, but I do, like everybody in the last 20 years, I do think we're close to the longest blade that we're going to get to. Yeah. I mean, what are we going to be making kilometer-long blades at some point? I mean, it's just no, we're not. But, now I feel like that guy in 2000 saying you'd never have a 20-meter-long blade. So,
Yeah, that would be an interesting conversation just to hear what they're planning for the facility, because I'm sure there's some amount of overrun, just like anything else. Like if there's, even if you're making like a health club, for example, like I used to own a baseball and softball academy, and we had to plan for the future. We're like, if this is our absolute minimum, but we could grow to this, what's the balance of like extra usable space we might want without bankrupting us and being wasteful now? I'm sure they're extrapolating above and beyond what they're currently doing. Maybe like, hey, let's build in 60 extra feet, 20 extra meters, just of like flex space that we can use for X, Y, and Z now. But if we need to cannibalize it later, we can do that, as blade. But then obviously that's only going to be to a point, right? They're not going to build a 180 meter long facility when that just might never be useful. So I'd be really curious what the plans are. That's actually really good points both of you raised. Just trying to prepare for the future and not build something that you outgrow, like a hermit crab shell, in just a couple of years, because that'd be really unfortunate. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Uptime Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe wherever you are on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and be sure to subscribe to Uptime Tech News, which you'll find in the show notes of this podcast, and Rosemary's YouTube channel, which you will also find in the description or show notes. Thanks again for watching or listening, and we will see you here next week on Uptime. All right, folks, good job. Operating a profitable wind farm is all about mitigating costs, minimizing risks, and being efficient with maintenance, repairs, and upgrades. It's incredibly expensive to send a team of rope access technicians up tower to make even simple repairs. We also know how costly lightning damage can be, requiring inspection, repairs, and downtime for even minor lightning strikes.